Have you ever had a neighbor who completely changed the way you saw the world? What if one day, someone moved in next door, and they were nothing like anyone you'd ever met before? Someone who made you question everything. In today's story, we're diving into the life of a man whose world was turned upside down by the girl who moved in right next door. You'll hear about a quiet, ordinary neighborhood, where nothing much ever happened, until she arrived. Her name was Emily, and from the moment she stepped into the scene, things began to shift. You'll learn about how the narrator first noticed her, reading books on her porch, tending to her garden, and carrying an air of mystery that was impossible to ignore. At first, it was all about curiosity. But as time passed, something deeper started to develop. Why did this new neighbor have such a profound effect? What was it about Emily that made him question everything he knew about himself, his life, and what truly mattered? If you're intrigued by the idea of ordinary lives colliding with the unexpected, this is the video for you. Stick with us until the end because we'll reveal how this seemingly small encounter led to life-changing revelations. Trust me, you won't want to miss how it all unfolds. Before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of our latest stories. Let's dive into today's tale, and see how a simple neighbor can make you rethink everything. The story takes a turn when an unexpected event brings the narrator and Emily together. It was a typical afternoon when the narrator noticed Emily standing next to her car, clearly frustrated. Her car was parked at the curb, and the tire had gone flat. At first, the narrator hesitated. Should he just ignore it? Or should he offer to help? But there was something about the way Emily stood there, looking helpless and a bit out of place, that made the narrator act. He grabbed his toolkit and walked over to her. "Hey, need some help?" he asked, trying to sound casual. To his surprise, Emily looked up with a small but relieved smile. "I'd really appreciate it," she replied. There was a moment of quiet as he began to work on the tire. She hovered nearby, watching but not saying much. It wasn't awkward, though. There was a calmness in the air, and a sense that they were sharing something simple but real. As the tire changed, they started talking. It was easy, natural, almost as if they had known each other for years, despite it being their first real conversation. Emily mentioned how she had just moved to the neighborhood and was still getting used to the area. "I didn't think I'd be dealing with a flat tire on day one," she joked, her voice light. The narrator laughed. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, feeling a sense of connection he hadn't expected. They shared a few more laughs, and after the tire was fixed, they both stood back and admired the work. "Thanks again," Emily said, clearly appreciative. "I was about to call a tow truck. Didn't even know where to start." The narrator shrugged, a little embarrassed by the praise. "No problem, glad to help." But before either of them could say anything more, Emily's phone rang. She excused herself, and the narrator watched her walk away, feeling something stirring inside him. There was something about her, about the way she spoke, her energy, the way she seemed so at ease even when everything wasn't perfect. It left him with a strange feeling, curiosity mixed with admiration. That wasn't the last time their paths crossed. Over the next few days, they would exchange brief greetings as they went about their routines. But it was during another random encounter, this time at the local coffee shop, that things began to shift again. The narrator was waiting in line when he spotted Emily, sitting by the window, sketching in a notebook. It looked like she was lost in her own world, but he couldn't resist. He waved when their eyes met, and she smiled warmly, beckoning him to join her. "Mind if I sit?" the narrator asked as he walked over. "Not at all," Emily replied, sliding her bag to the side to make space for him. They spent the next hour talking about everything and nothing. They exchanged favorite books, shared music tastes, and even talked about what they dreamed of doing one day. Emily told him about her love for painting, how she had moved here to find new inspiration, and how she was always chasing the next idea. For the first time, the narrator felt something shift inside him. He realized that there was a world beyond the ordinary life he had been living, a world full of passion, creativity, and possibility. Emily had a way of talking about her life that made everything seem so much more vivid, as if there were so many adventures just waiting to unfold. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the stirrings of something beyond his usual routine. He felt alive. As they talked, there was a growing sense of connection between them. The more they shared, the more the narrator realized how different their worlds were, but how similar their souls seemed. They both had dreams, though they were different in nature. Emily's were creative, free-spirited, and wild. The narrators, though still in formation, felt stifled by routine and hesitation. And yet, something in him was beginning to yearn for the courage to step out of his comfort zone, to embrace the unknown, just as Emily did. When they finally parted ways, Emily gave him a smile that felt full of meaning. "It's nice to have someone to talk to," she said softly. "Let's do this again sometime." The narrator walked home that day with a sense of contentment, but also a nagging feeling. Was it just friendship, or was there something more? He couldn't deny that the spark between them was undeniable, but he wasn't sure if she felt the same way. All he knew for sure was that Emily, the girl next door, was becoming someone he didn't want to lose sight of. As days passed, the narrator and Emily's connection deepened. What had started with brief, casual exchanges now blossomed into something more meaningful. They spent afternoons together, exploring the neighborhood, talking about everything under the sun. Every conversation felt like a small revelation, about each other, about life, about what it all meant. One of their first adventures together was a hike up a nearby hill that overlooked the town. Emily had suggested it one morning as they were grabbing coffee at the local cafe. "I know a great spot for watching the sunset," she'd said with a mischievous smile. "It's a bit of a climb, but it's worth it." The narrator agreed, of course. Something about her confidence, her sense of adventure, made him want to follow her anywhere. So, on that warm afternoon, they set out together, the path winding up the hill as they chatted and laughed along the way. As they reached the top, the sun was beginning its descent. The sky was a mix of pinks, oranges, and purples, painting the horizon in a breathtaking display. Emily sat down on a large rock and pulled out a sketchbook from her bag. "I bring this up here sometimes," she said, flipping open the pages to reveal beautiful sketches of the landscape. "It's my way of holding on to moments." The narrator sat beside her, amazed at the detail in her work. "You're really talented," he said, his voice full of admiration. "Do you sell your art?" Emily paused for a moment, then shook her head. "Not really. I paint for myself. It's the only way I know how to feel connected to the world. I know it sounds cliché, but it's like, the world makes sense when I create something." Her words struck a chord in the narrator. He had always admired creative people, but hearing Emily talk about her art with such passion made him realize how much he had been missing. His life, though comfortable, had lacked that kind of purpose. He had gotten stuck in the mundane, the routine, the predictable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a final glow over the landscape, the narrator found himself lost in thought. Emily's words lingered in his mind. He wondered if his own life could have that kind of meaning, if he could find something that made him feel as connected to the world as she felt when she painted. The days following that hike were filled with more moments like that. They would meet up at local art galleries, where Emily would talk about the works on display with an enthusiasm that was contagious. The narrator, who had never paid much attention to art before, found himself intrigued by the way she could see meaning in every brushstroke, every curve, every shade of color. It was a new way of looking at the world, and it was impossible not to be swept up in her enthusiasm. They spent weekends exploring new places around town. Emily knew all the hidden gems, the quiet coffee shops, the secluded parks, the best spots to catch the sunset. It was like she had a secret map to the world, a guide to the beauty that could be found in the simplest things. And as the narrator followed her, he began to see things differently, too. The beauty of the world was not just in grand gestures, but in the small, quiet moments, like sharing a cup of coffee at a sidewalk cafe, or sitting under a tree in the park, talking about nothing in particular. One evening, as they walked along the beach, the narrator couldn't help but feel a growing sense of connection with Emily. There was a chemistry between them that neither could deny, but it was more than just physical attraction. There was a deeper understanding, a kind of unspoken bond that seemed to tie them together. "So, what's your dream?" Emily asked out of the blue, as they walked along the shoreline. "I know you've been listening to mine. But what about you?" The question caught the narrator off guard. He had always been so focused on getting through the day-to-day that he hadn't really thought about his bigger dreams. But as he stood there, looking out at the vast ocean, something clicked. "I don't know," he said slowly. "I think I've been too afraid to really think about it. But maybe I want to find something I'm passionate about. Something that makes me feel like I'm not just going through the motions." Emily smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "You should," she said. "You deserve to find that." Her words echoed in the narrator's mind long after they said goodbye that evening. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was beginning to see the world through different eyes. Emily had opened a door to a world of possibility, and now, he wasn't sure if he could ever go back to the way things were before. Every day spent with her was like a small awakening, a chance to see more, to feel more, to be more. But as his feelings for Emily deepened, so did the question swirling in his mind. Was this just a fleeting connection, a temporary spark? Or was there something more between them? He wasn't sure yet, but he knew one thing for sure. Life was suddenly much more complicated, and much more exciting, than it had ever been before. As the days went on, the narrator found himself constantly thinking about Emily. What started as a casual connection had slowly evolved into something much deeper. They had moved from being simple neighbors to close friends, and it was becoming impossible to ignore the feelings he had started to develop for her. Emily's presence in his life was beginning to feel essential, as though everything he had known before she came along was somehow incomplete. It wasn't just the time they spent together that made her so significant, it was the way she made him see the world differently. Her perspective was so fresh, so uninhibited, that it was like she had unlocked a part of him that had been closed off for years. The more they talked, the more he realized how much of his life had been consumed by routine and comfort. He had never really questioned the path he was on, but now, with Emily by his side, everything felt uncertain, yet exciting. One afternoon, they found themselves at the park, sitting on a bench overlooking the lake. It was one of those peaceful moments where time seemed to slow down, and the world felt like it was just the two of them. Emily was sketching something in her notebook again, while the narrator stared out at the water, lost in his thoughts. "You're quiet today," Emily said, breaking the silence. She didn't look up from her sketchbook, but the narrator could sense that she was aware of his inner turmoil. "I've just been thinking," he replied, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. "About a lot of things." Emily set her pencil down and finally turned to him, her eyes full of curiosity. "Like what?" The narrator hesitated. "I don't know. Just life, I guess. I never really thought about it before, but now, I feel like I'm questioning everything. Like, what am I doing with my life? Am I just going through the motions?" Emily nodded, as if she understood exactly what he meant. "I think we all go through that. I know I have, but I've learned that sometimes, it's okay not to have all the answers. You don't need to know everything right now." There was something comforting in her words, something reassuring. But at the same time, they made him realize how much he was holding back. Emily had always lived her life with such openness and passion, and yet here he was, stuck in a place of uncertainty and hesitation. "I wish I could be more like you," he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "You seem so free. Like you're not afraid to follow your heart, no matter where it leads." Emily's expression softened, and for the first time, she seemed almost vulnerable. "I'm not always as free as you think," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "I've made mistakes, and there are things I wish I could change. But I've realized that it's better to take risks than to always play it safe." The narrator looked at her, taking in her words. There was something about the way she spoke, so candidly, so honestly, that made him feel like he was seeing the real Emily for the first time. He had always admired her confidence, her ability to live in the moment. But now, he saw that even she had doubts, fears, and regrets. It was a humbling moment, one that made him feel less alone in his own uncertainties. As the afternoon wore on, they continued to talk, about dreams, fears, the things that held them back, and the things that pushed them forward. The conversation flowed easily, but in the back of the narrator's mind, there was still a question he couldn't shake. Was there more to their connection than just friendship? He wasn't sure, but he couldn't ignore the way his heart raced when she looked at him, or how his stomach fluttered when they laughed together. By the time they parted ways that day, the narrator's mind was buzzing with thoughts. Emily had made him question everything, from the life he had been living to the person he thought he was. And yet, despite all the confusion, there was something exhilarating about it all. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the verge of something new, something that could change everything. As he walked back home, the weight of his feelings for Emily grew heavier. He didn't know where this was all going, but he couldn't deny that she had become someone incredibly important to him. And while he was still afraid of what might come next, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope. Whatever this was between them, he knew it was something worth pursuing. The question was Emily on the same page? The next few days felt different. There was an underlying tension in the air that neither the narrator nor Emily could ignore. What had been an easy friendship was now complicated by the unspoken feelings both of them were struggling to process. The narrator found himself wondering if Emily felt the same way he did, if she too was starting to see their connection as something more than just friendship. But he couldn't bring himself to ask, afraid of ruining what they already had. It was on a crisp evening when everything seemed to shift. The sun had just set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, and the narrator had gone for a walk to clear his head. He had spent the day wrestling with his emotions, torn between wanting to tell Emily how he felt and fearing her response. As he walked down the familiar street, he spotted Emily standing in front of her house. She was looking up at the stars, her posture relaxed, yet there was a quiet sadness in the way she held herself. Something about the scene made his heart ache, and before he could stop himself, he found himself walking toward her. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Emily turned toward him, and when she saw who it was, her face lit up with a small smile. "Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. Everything okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, as he stood next to her. Emily sighed, looking up at the sky once more. "I don't know, I've been thinking a lot. About life, about everything." The words hung in the air, and the narrator felt a sudden urge to reach out to her. He didn't fully understand what was bothering her, but he could sense it. There was something weighing on her, just like there had been on him. "You know," he began, "I've been doing a lot of thinking too. Lately, I've been wondering about where my life is going. I've always played it safe, stuck to the routine. But something about meeting you, it's like you've made me see the world in a different light." Emily glanced at him, her expression softening. "I didn't know I was making that kind of impact." She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It's not just you, it's everything. You've opened my eyes to a whole new way of looking at things. And I think, I don't know, I think I'm finally ready to stop living in the shadows of what I'm comfortable with." Emily turned toward him fully now, her eyes searching his face as though trying to read something unspoken. "I get it," she said quietly. "But sometimes, it's scary, isn't it? Taking that leap, not knowing what's on the other side." The narrator nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "Yeah, it is. But it's also exciting. I've never felt this alive before, like something inside me is waking up. I don't want to go back to the way things were." Emily's eyes met his, and for a moment, it felt like the world had paused around them. There was a silence between them, heavy with meaning, until she finally spoke. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I think I've been running from something, not allowing myself to truly experience life the way I want to. But every time I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally beginning to understand what it means to really live. To really feel everything." The confession hung in the air, and the narrator's heart skipped a beat. He had been afraid that opening up like this would make things awkward, but now, standing there with Emily, everything felt right. Her vulnerability mirrored his own, and for the first time, he realized that their connection was more than just chance. It was something real. "I don't know where this is going," he said quietly, "but I don't want to let it slip away." Emily looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing. The only sound between them was the rustling of leaves in the wind, and the soft hum of the world continuing on around them. But then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like everything had shifted in that instant. "Me neither," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The narrator's heart raced as their fingers intertwined. There was still uncertainty, still fear of the unknown, but in that moment, he knew one thing for sure: he didn't want to face whatever came next without Emily by his side. She had already changed his world, and now, with her hand in his, he felt like he was finally stepping into a new chapter of his life, a chapter that could be filled with possibilities, with adventure, and with something much deeper than either of them had expected. They stood there for a while longer, hands clasped, looking up at the stars. It wasn't clear what the future held, but in that quiet moment, the narrator felt more connected to Emily than ever before. And for the first time, he felt ready to embrace whatever was ahead, even if it meant stepping into the unknown together. The days that followed felt like a blur. What had once been a friendship marked by casual conversations and shared laughter had transformed into something much more intense. The narrator and Emily were no longer just neighbors, they were partners in a new chapter of their lives, navigating the uncertainties together. There was still an underlying tension, a sense of not fully knowing what this relationship was or where it was headed, but that didn't seem to matter. What mattered was that they were in it together, taking each step as it came. The change was subtle at first, small gestures that seemed insignificant but meant the world. A hand brushing against his when they were walking side by side, a look that lingered just a second longer than usual, a smile that seemed to carry more meaning than it had before. They were both walking a fine line between friendship and something more, but neither of them seemed willing to define it just yet. It was easier, perhaps, to just let it unfold without labels, without expectations. But as time went on, the narrator couldn't ignore the growing feelings inside him. He wanted more. He didn't just want to be her friend anymore, he wanted to be something more, someone she could lean on, someone she could trust, someone who would be there for her no matter what. Emily, too, seemed to be struggling with the same feelings. He could see it in the way she looked at him, the way her smile softened when their eyes met. But there was still something holding her back, a fear she hadn't fully shared yet. It was in the way she would sometimes pull away when things got too close, as though there was an invisible wall she wasn't ready to tear down. The narrator wasn't sure why, but he could sense that she had her own doubts, her own fears about moving forward. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of her house, the narrator decided to ask her about it. The night was quiet, the only sounds being the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. They were sitting side by side, not speaking for a while, both lost in their thoughts. Finally, he turned to her. "Emily," he began softly, his voice filled with hesitation. "Is something wrong? You've been distant lately, I can feel it." Emily didn't look at him right away, her fingers absent-mindedly playing with the hem of her sleeve. For a long moment, there was silence, and the narrator thought she might not answer. But then she turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and uncertainty. "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can be what you need." The words hit the narrator like a punch to the stomach. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily looked down at her hands, her lips pressed together in a tight line. "I've been running from a lot of things for so long. I've built this wall around myself to protect myself from getting hurt. And I've been afraid that if I let myself get close to someone again, I'll just end up hurting them, or getting hurt myself." Her words made the narrator's heart ache. He had always known there was something Emily was hiding, but hearing it now, hearing the vulnerability in her voice, made him realize how deeply her past had affected her. "I don't want to hurt you," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm scared. I'm scared of letting go, of letting myself care about someone again." The narrator reached out, taking her hand gently in his. He didn't know what to say at first, didn't know how to comfort her. But he knew one thing, he wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't going to let her push him away just because she was afraid. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to give up on you." Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "But what if I mess up? What if I can't give you what you need?" "I don't need anything from you that you don't want to give," the narrator replied, his voice steady and sincere. "I just want to be here for you. No pressure, no expectations. I'm here because I care about you, Emily. And if you're willing to let me in, I'll be here every step of the way." For a long time, Emily didn't say anything. She just stared at him, her gaze softening with each passing second. And then, finally, she nodded. It was a small, hesitant gesture, but it was enough. "I'm trying," she whispered, squeezing his hand in return. "I'm really trying." The narrator smiled, feeling a weight lift off his chest. It wasn't an answer to all the questions he had, but it was a step in the right direction. They didn't have everything figured out, and they weren't going to rush into anything. But for the first time, it felt like they were on the same page. Both of them were scared, both of them had their doubts, but they were willing to take the risk. Together, the night stretched on, and they sat there in the quiet, their hands still intertwined. The world around them seemed to fade away as they allowed themselves to simply be present in the moment. The fear of the unknown still lingered, but it didn't seem as overwhelming now. What mattered was that they had each other, and that, for the first time in a long time, the narrator didn't feel so alone. He had found someone who understood him, someone who saw him for who he truly was. And as they sat together, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate dance, each step forward accompanied by moments of doubt and hesitation, yet filled with more laughter and connection than either of them had expected. The relationship between the narrator and Emily had transformed in ways they hadn't anticipated, but what once seemed uncertain now felt like a steady, undeniable bond. They spent more time together, exploring the small, hidden parts of their town that they had never noticed before. Sometimes it was a spontaneous trip to the local diner, sharing a milkshake and talking about their favorite books. Other times, it was an impromptu walk along the river, where they would talk for hours, letting the gentle flow of the water mirror the ease of their growing connection. But even as the days went by, there was still an unspoken understanding between them. They were walking on fragile ground, unsure of what the future held. Emily had let her guard down in ways that felt significant, but there were moments when the old walls she had built around herself would reappear. The narrator, too, found himself torn between wanting to move forward and fearing that he might lose something precious if he pushed too hard. One evening, they sat together on the same porch where they had shared so many conversations. This time, the air was cooler, and the faint scent of rain hung in the air, signaling a change. They were both silent, each of them deep in thought, but the quiet was comfortable, familiar. Finally, the narrator spoke, his voice softer than usual. "Emily, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had never met?" She didn't answer right away, instead looking up at the stars above. For a long time, there was nothing but the sound of the evening breeze. The narrator wasn't sure if he had asked the right question, but before he could say anything else, Emily turned to him. "I don't think about that," she said quietly. "I think about what's happening right now, and how much I've changed since we met. I think about how much I've learned from you, about myself and about life. You've made me see things I never thought about before. You've made me not so afraid to feel." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had known that their connection was special, but hearing Emily say that made him realize just how much she had grown in this short time. She had let herself be vulnerable, let herself trust again, and that was something extraordinary. "I feel the same way," the narrator admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd be someone who would question everything. But you've made me look at life differently. I've never felt so alive, so open to whatever comes next." They sat there for a moment, taking in the weight of their words. There was a certain peace between them now, an understanding that the unknown didn't have to be something to fear. It could be something they faced together. But as the night stretched on, Emily seemed distant again, her gaze wandering off to the horizon, as though there was something on her mind that she wasn't saying. The narrator felt a familiar sense of unease stirring in his chest. He knew she wasn't quite ready to fully let go of her past, and he wasn't sure if she ever would be. But he also knew that he couldn't wait forever for her to heal, he couldn't keep holding on to something that might never fully materialize. "I don't want to lose you," he said suddenly, his voice raw. "But I need to know that we're moving in the same direction. That we're not stuck in this, in-between space." Emily turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise, as though she hadn't expected him to say that. For a moment, she said nothing, her expression unreadable. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to figure some things out. I need to be sure of what I want." The narrator nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He understood. He had known this wasn't going to be easy. He had known that their journey wasn't going to follow a straight line. There would be bumps, there would be moments of doubt, but what mattered was that they were both still trying. They hadn't given up yet, and for him, that was enough. "I'll be here," he said, the words coming from deep within. "I'm not going anywhere, either. But I need you to know that whatever happens, I'm grateful for what we have. I'm grateful for you." Emily looked at him then, her eyes softening, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. It wasn't a smile of certainty or finality, but it was one of hope. And that was all the narrator needed to see. They sat there for a while longer, the sound of the wind and the distant rumble of thunder creating a quiet soundtrack to their unspoken understanding. There was still a long road ahead, and they had no idea where it would lead. But what mattered in that moment was that they had each other. That was enough. As the rain began to fall gently around them, they sat in silence, the connection between them stronger than ever. The narrator realized that, even though they didn't have all the answers, they didn't need them. Together, they could face whatever came next, uncertain, imperfect, but real. And that, for both of them, was all they truly needed. As the rain continued to fall, the narrator sat there, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace mixed with the excitement of the unknown. There were still questions, still fears and doubts, but there was also a sense of clarity that hadn't been there before. They had both been through their own struggles, their own fears, but together, they had found something real. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't guaranteed, but it was theirs. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. Life would always have its twists and turns, and relationships weren't always easy. But as they sat there, side by side, hand in hand, the narrator knew one thing for certain: it was the journey that mattered. It wasn't about where they would end up, but how they would face it together. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, with Emily by his side, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it with open hearts and the courage to embrace whatever life had to offer. And so, the story didn't end with certainty or perfect answers. It ended with the understanding that love, growth, and change are all part of the same journey. The narrator and Emily had come a long way, and though the future was still unknown, they were ready to walk it together. If you've ever found yourself questioning what's next or wondering if love and connection are possible despite the fears and uncertainties, remember this: sometimes, it's not about finding all the answers, it's about having the courage to take the next step. Whether it's in your relationships, your personal growth, or your dreams, don't be afraid to face the unknown. Sometimes, the most beautiful stories are the ones that don't have all the answers but are built on trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to grow together. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had a moment that made you question everything? Let's talk about it, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories that dive into the heart of real-life struggles and triumphs. Keep exploring the unknown, you never know what you might discover.